All right, AP Psych. So this is the beginning of the behaviorism unit. A lot of it's going to be based on how you learn. A lot of this stuff we talk about, you'll be able to pull from early education. Um, and this will kind of give you also the idea that we're all, to an extent, lab rats running the maze, and our maze is our school, our workplace, our home, wherever that may be. All right, maybe not. I'm not. Okay, there we go. So when we look at learning itself, this is where a lot of people get things mixed up. Learning itself is not. Put it right there. And so with learning, we're actually really talking about changing your behavior. Now, memory does play a role in that, like you learn from experiences, things like that. But when you look at education, the learning part of education, the changing of behavior, I would argue would happen more in elementary, middle, where you build up those foundations of how to study, when to study, what tools to use. That would be where you're learning, a lot of your learning takes place. A lot of what our education, especially in high school, a majority of your classes are actually truly just testing knowledge, memory, which is involved in learning, but is not as big of a role or not as big of a factor as we think. Come on. All right, so when we look at learning itself, experience, because obviously that's the big thing. So this can range from direct experience or action to observation. You can learn through observation. That's going to be a later part of learning and behaviorism because it does incorporate a cognition, which early behaviorists couldn't study, couldn't account for. So learning is more flexible in comparison to genetically programmed behaviors like your rooting reflex, your Babinski reflex, the Mora reflex, the breathing reflex, which we can alter for a bit, but eventually the brain just takes over. Learning behaviors are relatively permanent, meaning they can change over time due to lack of practice, different things like that. But learned behaviors can be broken, but it is a little harder to break them than, say, some of your others. So when we look at like cramming for a test, that's a measure of memory. Changing one's study habits to improve the test scores, that is learning. But technically, if you can cram all throughout your high school, you have learned how to cram and you've learned that behavior to make it work for you. And so when you look at the study of learning, this is going to begin with behaviorism. And basically what we're looking at here, we're trying to take psychology from what they would argue as a pseudoscience with Freud to a more objective science, something we can test, we can prove, we can experiment with. The early behaviorists, Skinner, Watson, Pavlov, they do not study the mental process because it's not observable at the time. But as technology increases, MRI, FRI scans, PET scans, obviously we add that mental process later with the observational and the cognitive learning. So behaviorists are only going to worry about what can be observed and recorded. A lot of your teachers are behaviorists. They study what you do. They punish you for things you do wrong. We're not really necessarily worried about the cognition part because we can't really tell until you ask questions from there. But a lot of your teachers are behaviorists. According to behaviorists, the environment is driving everything. So there's little to no free will once the environment has already conditioned you. You just respond to it. The idea of the environment dictating and influence behavior charters a more rigorous learning environment. So that's going to create either A, smarter individuals or harder working individuals. It just kind of depends on what talents they already have with them. But that is going to be created by charters' rigorous environment, not necessarily your genetics. And so when we look at behaviorism versus psychoanalysis, behaviorism is a result or kind of to counteract psychoanalysis. Formed to counteract Freud's idea of the unconscious mind. You can't see it, you can't observe it, it's all theory-based, you can't test it, so why study it? So since Freud's ideas were unprovable and untestable in Skinner's and Pavlov's viewpoint, they created the idea of behaviors. Again, you can't study the unconscious mind, but we know it's there. We're not totally sure what it does. We're not sure if Freud's right about all those negative impacts. But this is going to be kind of like the early idea of the cognitive part, and has later And as our technology and our study of behaviorism gets more advanced, we will add the cognition to later. And the goal of this is to turn psych into a science, testable research, observation, experiments, instead of the psychoanalytic version, which is more of just here's the theory, work with it. Don't argue against the theory, but we want you to use our theory, the unconscious mind, to describe everything. So when we look at the types of learning we'll talk about, associative learning, this is going to be our classical conditioning. You learn to associate environmental stimuli with a response. Therefore, the stimuli creates the response. So the bell rings, you get up, you get ready to leave. Operant conditioning, here the behavior is done, then the consequence or then the environmental stimuli comes. So you do your homework for points. You're not going to get the points, then do the homework. That's not how operant works. Operant, it's behavior, then stimuli. In classical, it's stimuli, then behavior. So the order is reversed. And then the observational cognitive learning, as our knowledge of psych grows, our technology of accounting for and seeing the cognitive part increases, we add the cognitive, we add the observational part. So there's our three basic ways we're going to learn. So classical conditioning, this is going to be created by Pavlov. He's going to basically be an accidental psychologist. So here we're looking at, we associate a stimuli with a response. So the environment gives us something, then we respond with an action. That's the first version of learning. Okay, obviously he's going to train dogs to salivate at the sound of the bell. That's what he's most famous for. He's not originally a psychologist. He's more of a physician or biologist studying the effects of saliva on digestion. He actually creates this whole study of making the dog drool with a bell out of necessity, out of running out of funding and money. And basically here we look at, in this type of learning, the stimulus drives the behavior, the bell triggers you to leave, or the bell triggered the dogs to salivate. So here the stimulus drives the behavior, whereas in the operant it's going to be the behavior that drives the stimulus. And then he's going to provide the work for Watson, who's considered the father of behaviorism, even though Pavlov came before him. And then also B.F. Skinner, who's going to expand it into operant conditioning. One of the other reasons that Pavlov is not considered the father of classical condition, not only because he's not originally a psychologist, but he's also a Russian. And when his famous study comes out, that's when Russia switches to communism. So the American populace did not want to give full credit to a communist scientist because of the feud between capitalism and communism. You really need to know that. All right, so when you look at the elements of classical conditioning, there are going to be 4 basic elements. So in these type of questions, you'll have to identify, like, what's the unconditioned stimulus, what's the unconditioned response, what's the conditioned stimulus, what's the conditioned response. It's actually pretty simple, though. Unconditioned, though, is going to be naturally unlearned, so you're kind of born to know this already. You don't have to experience it to acquire the behavior or adapt the behavior. So the first is the unconditioned stimulus, a stimulus that naturally triggers a response or behavior. So the food or meat in Pavlov's study is going to be the unconditioned stimulus. The unconditioned response, this is always usually going to be a verb, so some type of action. So the unconditioned response would be salivating at the food or meat. You're going to have to always, for the unconditioned and the conditioned response, you're going to have to tell what elicits it, because if you don't, technically you could get it wrong, because the unconditioned response and conditioned response should be, if not exactly the same, should be similar. So salivating at the meat, that's natural. We don't have to learn that. Food is desirable. It's like food and meat, desirable to us. We don't have to learn the impact or the reward of that. The second set of elements are the conditioned. So this is when the learning takes place. So we have to experience this in some way, shape, or form. You have to practice it. At first, the Conditioned stimulus are going to be neutral because the first time an organism is exposed to them, it's not going to create anything. They have no knowledge of what this is supposed to do. So when Pavlov first rang the bell in front of the dog just looked at him. They didn't react. So practice, that makes it a condition. So a conditioned stimulus, usually irrelevant, neutral, and after association learning, then it triggers a response. So the bell and the tone, that becomes our condition. You don't naturally drool or salivate at a bell or a tone. And then the conditioned response, this is the learned response to the neutral stimulus. So now we're salivating at the bell or tone. So how we separate the responses is we also identify what triggers them. So if you just put salivating at this, you're going to get points off because salivating is also the unconditioned response. So when those are the same, you have to differentiate. So like here's how the conditioning would work. The bell or the food with the dog, natural reaction. You ring the bell, dog doesn't know what to do. He probably gives you that sideways head look. But through practice, the tone, then the food, the tone, then the food, then the dog eventually realizes the tone signals the food, so now he drools. It's kind of like as soon as you go into the cabinet or the storage place where you store your dog's treats, the dog gets excited because he's associated that location with a treat. Conditioned it. And that's really what we're looking at with it. So that's just the first part. We will do more practice with identifying the different stimuli, but the next screencast you're going to get is going to be on how these principles and how this process of classical conditioning works.